Hi, and welcome to today's Q&A session on pianoTV. So the way this works is about once a month, I gather 4 of your questions that I think are going to be relevant to a lot of people and answer them as best as, this one piano teacher can. So if you have any questions that are bugging you, any ideas that you might want to ask, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And I might or might not compile them for the next Q&A session. So today's batch of questions is really technical. We're going to be talking about how to do hand leaps, how to play staccatos quietly, how to play without mistakes, and we're going to finish with a discussion on key signatures. So let's get started. Okay, so the first question is from Wilson, who wants to know if there are any tips or exercises for when you have to jump from one note to the other, when there are 2 or more octaves, when they're far away from each other. You have to do it quickly and smoothly, and you have to land at the note without losing the rhythm, and you have to be precise like a jumping cat. The jumping cat. I have definitely been in your shoes. For my grade 10 exam, I had to learn Liszt's Liebestrom number 3, which I have on the screen, just this intense middle section where both hands are just doing these fast, constant leaping octaves. And I kind of found the left hand especially burdensome to execute. And I felt like when I was first learning it, my accuracy was super random. Sometimes I would land on the right note and sometimes I wouldn't. It just kind of felt like I was flying on the seat of my pants. So I hit a point in my practice where I was like, hey, enough is enough. I want to be more than 50% accurate in my playing. So I started reading about it and testing out some things, and here's what worked for me. Moving my arm in an arc, not a line. This is a big one. It's a lot more natural and fluid to move your arm in a semicircle as you leap instead of quickly flinging it to the side. So when your arm is just moving in a line, it's really hard to memorize the movement. But with an arc, you can start to memorize the distance of a movement. You see how I'm not flying off the piano, that would just make things much worse, but if I'm trying to fling it, it's much harder to make it to my destination. So if this is my note, you can just kind of see how I'm arcing. And that's how I can get that accuracy. It's kind of like when you learn how to throw a ball. You start memorizing the force and the arc of your arm as you throw, and then that allows you to get better and better at estimating throw distances. I'm just kind of demonstrating the throwing. So I had this come up when I was learning a Liszt song, where I had to train my arms to do those leaps, and I did a lot of eyes closed practice in order to do those octave leaps without, hitting the wrong note every time. It really is just about memorizing those arc movements. The second point is to train your tactile memory, and this is just training your movements. So being able to, say, for example, play with your eyes closed. I was already kind of talking about this along the same lines of moving your arm in an arc. I find eyes closed practice to be super effective because it forces me to, instead of relying on my eyes, it forces you to focus on your body's tactile movement. If you can make a leap with your eyes closed the vast majority of the time, then once you get everything hands together, it'll be more natural. Your hands won't be doing the scramble. You know what I'm talking about? When you're jumping to a note and then there it is. Your hands just kind of freak out for a second before they find their goal. If you kind of train those tactile movements with your eyes closed, it'll eliminate the scramble. I know you can't see my face right now, but I'm going to close my eyes and attempt that jump. So I went too far. So I would look with my eyes, just kind of see, get a feel for it. Now with my eyes closed again. Oh, I still went too far. There we go. It's kind of a tedious process, but it's also kind of fun. And the third point is to not let yourself hit the wrong note. So do not allow yourself to hit the wrong note. I'm realizing that a lot of my suggestions today are purely based on tactile or touch, which I find is what helps me the most a lot of the time. That's my problem. So you really want to avoid practicing hitting the wrong note. We can be really vulnerable to this in situations where our hands are leaping. So we leap like that, we miss, it sounds bad, and then if we kind of keep hitting that same, so with me, leaping too far, once I start doing that enough times, I'm practicing that, and I'm repeating that note, and so maybe it's to the point where I'm only hitting the the right note 50% of the time. You're training yourself to be inaccurate by hitting the wrong note so often. So one thing you can do to avoid that is start catching yourself right before you land. So if I'm like a second away from hitting that C instead of the B, I stop. And I really, I give myself an extra little half beat to move my hand to the right place. It's better to do slow practice like that, is slow and accurate, as opposed to fast and sloppy. If I'm going to hit all the wrong notes, it's better to move slower to ensure that I'm not practicing wrong notes. So the second question is from Charles, and he says that he started working on Minuet in G about 8 days ago. He's completely memorized. He can play it really well. But when he attempts to play the whole thing from the beginning without any mistakes, I just can't do it. So what's with that? So it could be anything from your fingers slipping and hitting the wrong key, your brain freezes, you have to start over. So he's wondering what's going on here, and I want to also add that he writes, it seems to me to be a mental thing where my brain just can't detach enough from my body and just let things happen. I have to intervene with my active mind, if that makes any sense. So he's just frustrated why I should be able to play this little piece from beginning to end, but when I try it, I inevitably fail. So let's address this. I really wanted to tackle this question because it's something that I personally experience, and so do a lot of my older students and adult students especially. So why is it that when we know a piece really well, to the point where we can even play it from memory, do we still make mistakes on a complete full playthrough? So there's a lot that goes into this, but here are a few ideas that I've found to be helpful. So first of all, I think you're absolutely right with your mind getting in your way. I think, at least with me, it's almost like your mind is telling you to mess up. It's warning you you're about to mess up. Especially say you're halfway through your piece, you're playing it really well. All of a sudden that self-conscious mental dialogue starts and your brain starts saying, you're gonna mess up now, you've been playing too good for too long, the mistakes are gonna start happening. And it's just your brain is trying to sabotage you. So when this happens, we have to ask the question, how do we get our brain out of our way? So one thing that I find works for me is to reverse psychology myself. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but this happens to me when I record videos. It's I turn on the camera and all of a sudden I get really self-conscious and my fingers freeze up and it's oh no, don't make mistakes, Allysia, don't mess this up. So what I end up doing to relax myself is I say, you know what? Who cares if I mess up? Doesn't matter. It's not I'm on a time limit. I can spend as long as I want to do this recording. I don't need to get it done in the next 5 minutes. I can take an hour if I need to. So I just kind of relax my approach and say, you know what? Make mistakes. Mistakes are okay. It means you get to practice more, and practice is a good thing. So you know what? Allysia, make those mistakes. I don't care. Make them. And then I make less mistakes because I'm not putting all this pressure on myself to play perfectly. When I mentally allow myself to make mistakes, they just don't happen as much. Our silly brains. So the thing that's going on here is anytime there are stakes, that's when we start to freak out. All of a sudden the performance matters. You're playing in front of a teacher or you're playing in front of the people. Maybe the stakes are don't mess up because you'll make a huge fool out of yourself in front of everyone. Or maybe the stakes are just you got to play through this with no mistakes. But anytime you have those stakes, there's going to be pressure. And anytime there's pressure, your mind is just going to be right in the forefront. So taking the no big deal approach, no big deal if I make a mistake, I think is a really good way to kind of get that mind back, get it out of your way so you can kind of play without self-consciousness. The second part of this answer that I want to talk about is the idea of marinating. So sometimes when a piece is really new, and you had mentioned you'd been doing it for about 8 days, so that's, I think, a pretty fresh piece. We might be able to play them well, but they haven't had enough time to sit in our head to really marinate and just kind of soak in the back of our minds. So what might happen is if you can play a piece awesome after a week, you still might find these little slips sneaking up on you, but those slips are probably going to mostly disappear if you kind of keep that piece on the back burner for the next month or so. Because you might find, you just the more you sit with a piece, the more you just kind of have it in your mind. If you go from a week to a month, it's just going to naturally become easier to play without mistakes. As a final point, it could just be that there are tiny pockets in the piece that you're not as comfortable with as the rest of the piece. So what you can do then is take those slips as opportunities. One thing that I'll do if I'm doing a full run through, maybe I'm playing like a page of music or something, and I make a mistake. I'll make a note, like I'll actually physically note it on the music where I made the mistake. And then I will isolate that to the bar to where the mistake happened, practice it a few times to get it a little bit more comfortable, and then attempt another playthrough. And then when I attempt another playthrough, maybe I make a mistake in a completely different spot, and then I go through and give it the same treatment. I isolate that bar to, I play it a few times to get better at it, and so on. So these little mistakes can actually like alert us to parts where our memory is just a little less comfortable than the other parts of the song. So you can use that as a way to enhance your practice. The next question is from Joseph, and he's wondering how to play quiet staccatos. In his piece that he's playing some notes that are staccato and forte, and then the other notes are staccato and piano. Okay, playing quiet staccatos is actually one of the most challenging piano techniques, especially when they're fast staccatos. The one thing that I notice my students do the most often when they attempt quiet staccatos is they just kind of like barely flick the key, so it doesn't like, it only kind of presses down halfway, it doesn't fully press down, or like maybe some of the notes press down but other ones don't make a noise. We do have to press lightly to make a staccato sound, but that shouldn't be confused with pressing shallow. So if you don't press the note all the way down to its depth, if you kind of just press it halfway, that's when you run into the risk of not making a noise at all when you're playing staccato. It gets a really wimpy sound too. Like I'll just try to demonstrate. Like the staccato sound really weak and uneven. So what you need to make sure you're doing is that your fingers are actually, you can feel this, the base of the key. You want to make sure your fingers are hitting the bottom of the keys or playing deep instead of shallow. You can literally feel it like when you press. And it's really important to get a feel for this so that when you play staccato, you can still press the key just as deeply as if you were doing smooth, but you know, lighter. And the way that I'm practicing this right now is how I would practice it, just with like simple scales and triads, like really focusing on hitting the bottom of the keys, and quiet and loud, and just kind of varying the volume but still maintaining the same depth. And you really hear the difference, like compared to here's the shallow playing, right? It's super uneven, it just sounds weak. That time I'm getting to the bottom of the keys. And the last question today from Lindy wants to know about key signatures. What do they mean? How do they translate to the keyboard when you're playing a piece? Basic questions are good too, because I'm sure there's lots of people who wonder what the point of key signatures are also. And this is something that I'm really careful to explain in my lessons, because I think it's a really important thing to understand. There are 12 different keys on the piano, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, before they start repeating themselves at a higher pitch. So with every one of these 12 keys, there is a scale associated with each of them. So you can play a C scale, a D flat major scale, you can play a D scale, and so on. So in order for these to sound right, each of these scales has its own unique pattern of sharps and flats. So C scale, no sharps or flats. D scale has a couple sharps. Now, all these scales follow the same shape, they have the same formula, but no two scales are alike. Some have lots of sharps, some have lots of flats. So what key signatures are telling us is what scale a piece is written in. So if you look at this key signature right here, there are no sharps and flats. So that means that this piece is based off the scale that has no sharps and flats, and that's the key of C. Because if you play a C scale, it's all white keys. So in another example, if you have just one sharp floating in the key signature, what scale only has one sharp? It's G scale. It has an F sharp right at the very end. So this piece, if this is your key signature at the beginning of the piece, is going to be based off of G major scale. So key signatures, aside from telling us what sharps and flats to watch out for in a piece, are also giving us a critical piece of information, what scale the work of music is based on. So 4 flats on a page might look kind of scary, but if you're familiar with A flat major scale, and you can play that scale easily, then a piece written in A flat major with four flats it isn't going to phase you. You already know the key. You already know the pattern and note. I mean, it's not always this simplistic. Like, sometimes keys are minor, which is a whole other story. Sometimes pieces change keys, but this is the basic idea, and hopefully gives you some perspective as to why it matters to know these things. Thank you so much for watching today's Q&A session. I hope that you found something in here that you can apply to your own practice session, something that you felt was valuable or helpful. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a question below if you have something that you want me to tackle, you think other people might benefit from having the answer to as well. You can come visit me on social. I exist on Patreon and Facebook and all of those other locations. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Catch you later. Sorry. Mid-recording, let the cat outside, impromptu.